To take a true eco-critical standpoint to anything, we have to start at the beginning, with the Big Bang Theory, impartial and of course speaking about the terrible television show, but I am also speaking of the millennia upon millennia of also things we are going to cover here. Wait. Hold up. I am not going to get ahead of myself. Alright? Let's keep it simple. When you hear about people going to the Grand Canyon, you think of a vast, open wonder of the world that is beautiful to the human eye. This is, of course, true, but it is very obvious that people prefer to be on the paths that give the best views, rather than inside of the canyon and risking their lives. This natural view is in a broader context of pastoralism. Pastoralism, as a concept, often produces a vision of nature with no human hands to pollute it, but with a sometimes subtle and other times not so subtle amount of evidence that human hands are keeping it safe from ourselves or the world around it becomes quite clear. First, many may ask, what is pastoralism? The term itself is very subjective in the eco-critical field, but the common association that seems to comes up from an environmental scholar by the name of Terry Gifford. Terry Gifford came up with 3 subcategories of pastoralism, and these subcategories being classical pastoral, romantic pastoral, and American pastoral. Classic pastoral seems to have a literary focus connected to the early Hellenic associations with tranquility and with an emphasis or a want for a disconnect from what is urban and a reconnect with the rural. An example that I use, and that I'm sure my classmates are getting sick of hearing about, is the example of the American shopping mall. The mid-American shopping mall of the 1970s onward was an example of a controlled simulacrum. The shopping mall was meant to capitalize on customer interaction, a constantly populated spatial environment that could not go barren, and an overwhelming need to support the larger conglomerate that held every business in every working part of the mall together. This relates to that safety and control aspect in romantic pastoralism, and it is centered around economics. As the professor Leo Marx, no relation to the once terrible Karl Marx, once stated, romantic pastoralism is located in a middle ground, somewhere between, yet in a transcendent relation to, the opposing forces of civilization and nature. So, romantic pastoralism is one view that saw a codependence from the Industrial Revolution and a vastness of imaginative thoughts that promoted the creation of many comforting environments, even if fake. What could contest with a Mall of America, you may ask? Well, here's an example of those 3 key aspects mentioned before, but without the control of hands-on maintenance. This is the polar opposite of a functional simulacrum.
If money is evil, then that building is hell.
This video clip, with a very upset Robert Downey Jr. is the madness of civilization that professors such as Leo Marx argue need to be balanced with nature. This leads us to our final inquiry, which is arguably the most natural and one held closer to Western civilization because of how much it affected the land we stand on, the land that natives have come from, the one where stereotypes have wrought the course of history through. Malicious intent started originally as just simple interest. Regardless, let's jump into the American pastoral. The American pastoral often tends to make a fiction narrative out of a non-fiction critique of nature. When the Western frontier was a new obsession with the wilderness, the frontier male was born from this idea that we as Americans need to conquer the savage land. Instead of trying to avoid industry and urbanization, the Western frontier ideal became more towards the theater of the mind, in a sense that there was a simple distinction between right and wrong, simple and complex. The draw was black and white mentality rather than the separation of it. It gave the average American character reason in their manifest destiny to a foreign land. In finding these many different distinctions between a few people's different ideals on the subject, a professor by the name of Lawrence Buell stood out to me as the man that claims the critical approach seemed too broad. As a rebuttal, he suggested a set of 4 requirements in order to constitute if something is ecologically oriented in early American literature. Number 1. The non-human environment is present not merely as a framing device, but as a presence that begins to suggest that human history is implicated in natural history. Number 2. The human interest is not understood to be the only legitimate interest. Number 3. Human accountability to the environment is part of the text's ethical orientation. And number 4. Some sense of the environment as a process rather than as a constant or a given is at least implicit in the text. As it is stated that these 4 requirements often have trouble standing up to eco-critical testaments, it is hard to determine whether or not it has clarified many things, or if the cycle has been made more confusing by a vicious roundabout. I would like to thank everybody in the class for a stellar time studying the eco-critical analyses that are vastly abundant in this world. Though I may not have eco-criticism down to a T, it is always knowledge that makes me strive further beyond failure and beyond hardships, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. Now, turning back to the Grand Canyon. To stand and gaze on the Grand Canyon from a bird's eye view is one person's preferred perspective over the one that likes to go below the sea level and see creatures unmasked by tourists before. Pastoralism is such a broad concept that if it were material, it may not fill the Grand Canyon. That is hyperbolic. I am absolutely certain it would not get anywhere near close. However, it is vast and in between, characterized by the professors and philosophers themselves on what they thought. So, it's ultimately up to the people to decide what their pasture is and how they can reach it. Thank you, and have a wonderful night.